Joining me now on the Switch Up, we have Arndrea Waters King and Martin Luther King III. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you
for having us. Yeah.
So we are just about to celebrate your father's birthday as well as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Talk to me about how you're both feeling in this moment. There's been a lot of change within the last few months alone. Does this year feel different?
Well, the short answer is yes. Not just because of the inauguration, but because we started off the year with a big tragedy in New Orleans and Las Vegas. And then, of course, we went straight to the fires that are the most devastating thing that I've seen in a number of years for so many people to have lost their homes, to have lost things that they can never replace. Then, of course, as we observed the inauguration, the hope is that the climate can be created so that the president will do things that bring us closer together. He obviously does not have a history of doing that. And that kind of leadership is needed now more than ever because of the tremendous division in our nation. We have to plan for the best, but also know that it potentially could go in a different direction. And I guess anxiety is one word, but I always want to be hopeful. What I know is, as we are observing this King holiday, that my dad taught us civility, and my mother taught us how to disagree without being disagreeable. And the hope is to bring that climate back, because if we continue to go down a road of division, hostility, and what appears to be hatred, that is not sustainable. You really, the world is in flames in many places. And, you know, the interest of the United States is to protect itself from anything that might be an enemy. But how do you fight externally and internally? That's just not a good feeling. Now, what we believe, the values of peace, justice, and equity are what we are promoting. My father and mother wanted to eradicate from our society what Dad defined as the triple evils: the evil of poverty, the evil of racism and bigotry, and the evil of violence. And we've got a long way to go before we can actually realize the dream. And as a result, we have been working on a project now, an initiative called Realize the Dream, which is 100 million hours of service for Dad's 100th birthday, which is 2029. And in that context of bringing the nation together, we also have launched and written a book, which I know we'll get into, called what is our legacy? To talk about legacy, my legacy. And also we're launching a podcast. So there are a number of things that are going on this year that are very exciting.
One thing also is that you didn't mention also is the passing of President Jimmy Carter. Yes. We were just here for that last week. And I think I really don't believe in coincidences. And he certainly was an example of a life well lived. He also was an example of servant leadership. He gave an example of truly trying to be in alignment and use the office of the president to bring people together, to really look at eradicating the triple evils. And certainly a lot has been talked about his time after, the president. And when we talk about legacy, I think that, you would be hard pressed to find someone that had lived out in present times with such a tremendous legacy that really made an impact, so much so that being president almost was a footnote. But what was very interesting and hopeful even about his service, which we were here for last week, was to see, at least in practice, all of the presidents and vice presidents and, sitting together, but more than that, hearing. And, listening to all of these, stories of, again, a man of tremendous courage and legacy. And the hope is that, that would be something that will be carried forward. And we will see very soon.
Yes, well, and I think the idea of legacy is very interesting. Your daughter, of course, is the only grandchild of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I can't help but think about the legacy that he left behind when we think about the civil rights movement. And one of the things that I was thinking about as we started preparing for the episode is the fight that it took to be able to have that legacy recognized, the years that it took just to be able to have a holiday honoring his legacy and the work that he did.
Which we wouldn't have without Coretta Scott King.
Yes, and well, I want to take a moment just to recognize your mother. And I think sometimes when we think about Dr. King and we think about Dr. King's holiday, sometimes we don't always hear about your mother. So I want to take a moment to honor her and speak about the legacy that she helps leave behind as well in conjunction with your father.
So, Mom had was a tremendous visionary because when you're engaged in movement, which they both were, I mean, she was a real partner with Dad. And while Dad and his team, and even she to a degree, were making history, she was protecting and preserving history. Now, what I mean by that is when Dad was killed on April 4th, by June, the beginnings of June, which is less than 2 months from his death, she and a team had created the Martin Luther King Center. And it was up and running. And the concept theoretically would take years to develop, but not if you had already been thinking about what's going to happen. So having a seat at the table to be a part of the history that Dad and his team, including Mom, made, and to be able to say at some point these documents that have been created are going to be of value to people to understand and know and learn, and to create an institution to institutionalize the work. And that's, that was like the center was her fifth child in a real sense. And although, I had siblings, and there are only two of us left today. But Mom had the visionary, not just that, because actually she was, a leader in so many in the LGBTQIA community. I mean, she was the first, or certainly one of the first, to talk about the issues and how we need to address them. She was involved in helping to create the hospital, the union that hospital workers to unionize or organize. And there's so many things that she did throughout her life. But I want to basically state that she and Dad, Dad would call her from on the road, and one of the last voices he heard when he was making decisions, or he came to Mom to get her advice. Now you understand a little bit, honey. And he wouldn't make any decisions without at least asking my mom, well, what do you think this is something we should do? And because Mom, when they first met, Mom was at the Boston Conservatory of Music, and Dad was at BU, and they had a 6-hour conversation. They had read a lot of the same books Mom had been involved in the peace demonstrations before Dad. So Dad actually said, you know, my wife brought me to the peace movement. She was before me. And I think, I don't know, I don't know if that's known. I don't think that's known very well by the community. But you know, I cannot say enough. In addition to raising the four of us, so you know, Mom stands extraordinarily tall, and maybe all of us feel our mothers are that way, and we should. But I feel, you know, when on April 8th we went to Memphis, and Mom led a demonstration that Dad was to have led. He was killed on April 4th. You know, when you think about the courage, no one had been captured for his murder. That didn't stop her. That said to me, that reinforced the fact that she was involved and wanted to continue, because she could have, no one would have criticized her for mourning, being in mourning, which most people would be doing. But she understood that this work is ongoing and important, and I must do all that I can to continue to advance this mission of freedom, justice, and equality.
I'm thinking about this moment, the sort of crossroads of recognizing your parents' legacy at the same time that we're about to swear in President-elect Trump, who has a history of controversial comments, has supported individuals who have said hateful things about your family. How does that affect the way that you approach the next 4 years, frankly?
Well, I think one of the things that we talk about quite often is that whole idea of the tale of two wolves, in which a little girl comes up to her grandmother and says, you know, grandmother, can you please help me? There's a battle inside of me. There are two wolves that are in a fight, and one is, you know, full of hatred and division and ugliness, and there's another wolf, though, that is full of love and peace and justice and nobleness, and they are fighting inside of me. I'm not sure which one will win. Can you please tell me? And the grandmother pulled her close and said, the wolf that you feed. I think in some ways that it is no coincidence that on this January 20th, on this inauguration, on this King holiday, we all have to make the decision to decide which wolf are we going to feed. Are we going to feed the wolf of more hate, more division, or are we going to feed the wolf of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, of peace and justice, and equity, nobleness, and love? Part of that, yes, it will be, we have to be very keen on what's going on legislatively and always be standing for laws that lift us all up and not limit us. So we certainly have to do that. We have done that. We will continue to do that. Also, at the same time, as Dr. King talked about, you know, he said you can't legislate, you can legislate a man not lynching you, but you can't legislate his heart. So while we're working on legislation, which we will continue to do, we also have to look at how can we lift up all of humanity. And to that end, that's how we came up actually 3 years ago with the Realize the Dream initiative, which is really about bringing us all together, particularly young people, building a movement, building community through service so that they can have a part in creating and being a part of the world in which they're going to inherit at a time when we're more divided, you know, than ever. Dr. King's last book is entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? I don't know anyone that has not felt like they have been touched by chaos in the last 4 to 5, well, longer than that, years. But you can't spell community without unity. You know, what we are doing through creating Realize the Dream is truly building that path to the beloved community, a path in which all of us have a role and part to play. We are all, in a very real sense, heirs to the King legacy. So that's, you know, for us coming together, pledging and fulfilling 100 million hours of service together by the 100th birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. That's one way that we can get involved. And one way, because I think particularly on a day like today, if, this will be aired on the King holiday, and we are looking at speeches and videos, and that's wonderful. But we also have to remember that Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King didn't just see what was wrong. They were people of action. They did do something about it, and we have that same power within us. And it simply is our generation's turn in that long march towards freedom.
What is, for you, the purpose of these moments? Is it a reminder of the legacy? Is it a reminder of the work still to be done? What is it for?
It's actually both. The way I look at it is every year I'm asked, have we realized the dream? And every year I have to say, no, we have not. But because Dad's birthday falls in January at the very beginning of the year, I say we have an opportunity once again to work to realize the dreams. So it is because of where we are. The hope is inspiration. Mom never wanted the holiday to be what holidays traditionally are, which are days where you're relaxing and just chilling and having a good time. She always said this is a day on, not a day off, which means that we must be engaged in the work and mission until that is fulfilled. When that day comes, that work is done of freedom and justice and equality, hypothetically for all people, then maybe we can move on to something else. But the fact of the matter is we're nowhere near where we should be. Doesn't mean progress hasn't been made. I mean, 60 years ago, we had no black billionaires. Today, we have at least 12 that we know about. There are probably some under the radar who are smart.
Don't come to me.
Yeah. But my higher point is when you look at income and inequality, we aren't even in the game. Average white family may have almost $300,000. At least certainly that was close to that prior to the pandemic. And the average black family is less than 25,000 saved up. Now, how do we, by now you would think, which is, 55 years since Dad, 56 going into 57 years since Dad's assassination, that would have closed some. And it hasn't. That's just one area. There are so many areas that we need to look at. I mean, we're a nation now that is embroiled in dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion. But yet, you had no problem allowing slavery for years. I don't mean the people here today, but as a society for 250 years, free labor. That's the only reason our economy is the strongest economy in the world, because you had 250 years of free labor. And then that history, you've decided, well, we don't want to hurt this generation, so we want to take that history out of the books. We talk about this being a free nation, the land of the free, the home of the brave. How are you free when you're restricting people? Not that children should be reading certain materials, but the fact of the matter is they should not be banned in the way that it's being done, because that is a disservice to everyone. It is said that a people that do not remember their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so I think we have to be intentional, we have to be focused, we have to be strategic, we have to be working. Whatever we're going to go through, we've been down this road before. We overcame then, and we have a greater obligation to overcome now.
I want to take a moment because I know we've been talking a lot about your parents' legacy, which should be recognized, should be honored, but you have now created your own book to discuss your own legacy. What is my legacy? Realizing a new dream of connection, love, and fulfillment. Take a moment. What is your legacy? What do you feel is your legacy? Or what is the legacy of the Drum Major Institute, of the new King family?
Well, the idea in the book is to redefine also what legacy is. I think for so many people, legacy is just making a lot of money, leaving your name on a building or a park bench. And what we are saying is, in order to truly, again, realize the dream and create the beloved community, it's us re-tapping into that sense of community, that reconnection with ourselves, and living for something larger and greater than yourself and your purpose. And when you're doing that, not only then that's how you will create fulfillment. And when we all are doing that, that's how we will creating. When you're literally operating, not just based on me, but based on we. When you're operating from a sense of, again, when we started the conversation as President Carter, a sense of service, then yes, you will, perhaps reach great heights. And you will, in leadership roles and be remembered in history, but you also will be remembered for your impact that you made in being an agent truly of love. And we always have to be explain when we're talking about love that we're not talking about the sentimental version of love. I mean, that is one version of love, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. In fact, the Greeks and Dr. King talked about the 7 levels of love. But the highest level is agape. It truly is a recognition of the fact that we are all interconnected. It's a recognition of our true brotherhood and sisterhood. And it actually is, once we're living that and recognizing that, that's what even in Indian Gandhi, Satyagraha, that soul force, that's the love that literally will change and has changed our nation and our world. And so this book, in some ways, is a reawakening and a reimagining to each and every one of us to really see ourselves within the King legacy, to see our part and our role. And because when we all are doing that, again, that's how we really will create that beloved community.
And I might add, everyone won't accumulate a lot of money to leave behind. Everyone won't have, a high-profile legacy, but everyone can have a legacy. And the goal, part of the goal is to have people rethink about legacy. So not to think about, well, I'm doing all this for the end of my life. What am I doing every day to create legacy? Whatever it is. It could be on your job, what you're doing and how you're interacting with your fellow human beings. It can be in a school system. It can be pretty much anywhere. And we want people to think about that because all of us do have legacies. And, the other thing is connection. We are so disconnected. Social media creates as many problems as it creates solutions, maybe. And I should say, that may not be framed correctly because the solutions are there, but we're only using it in a minor way in terms of what it potentially can do. And so as a result, it's not being maximized, but it is creating all kind of divisions. It's creating all kind of insecurities. It's creating a syndrome of people, you see something and you say, oh, I want to be like that. And that is an acting scenario. Many of the people who are promoting and propagating that behavior don't necessarily live that way. So, it's a false narrative, but everybody thinks, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. And then if you're not successful, you equate yourself to that. And so, again, we want people to think about it in a different way and to reconnect with one another. I mean, in our home, we sit down and eat, my wife and daughter and I, pretty much every day. And, we have exercises that we engage in. Sometimes we just talk about what's going on in the world, what happened in your circumstances. But we also sometimes talk about what are your wins, I mean, it's a reframing and a rethinking of how we navigate through, life's challenges. And the connection is so important. Because we're disconnected, we have more suicides We have homicide. Things are just crazy. It just didn't happen at some point. Their mental health challenges are beyond huge. And again, we want people to engage, to think about legacy, to build their own legacies, which they're doing, whether or not they realize it or not. And at the end of the day, we want our society to become more connected.
Because when we're doing that, we are all more connected, and that's how last year, the three of us, Martin, myself, and our daughter Yolanda, had an opportunity. We went to go see the Dalai Lama in India. And one of the things that he talked about, he wrote the foreword to the book. Yeah. To the book. We're very grateful and humbled that he would do so. But one of the things that he talked about with us, I mean, it was really interesting and wonderful to be with him in his environment, because we had met him many times before, but not in his home, in his environment. But he kept coming back over and over to the idea of the oneness of us all, the oneness of humanity. And that is what we're trying to also get across in this book, the oneness. I mean, if you know, it talks about, again, our connection with ourselves, our family, and larger, but it also talks about that. It has the spirit of that oneness and weaving in, again, that sense of building community, taking that message, because it's when we're all being a part of that message, that's how we really will see the change that we want to see in the world.
I want to think about for a moment the legacy of our country. I think, you know, we came from slavery through Jim Crow, civil rights, lynching, gosh, your father, your mother, where we are today, where we've had a black president, a black female vice president. I think about, we have 62 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the largest ever, a black female Supreme Court justice. We seem to have made progress when we think about where our black community has started to where we are today, but it seems like there's so much work left to do. How do we keep moving forward even in times where we're sitting here saying it feels like we're going backward?
By moving forward, by not giving up. Because yes, all of those things that you mentioned are true and they're cause for celebration. Also, it also is true that our daughter, the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, she and her peers have progressively lost rights since the day that she was born, that they were born. And a girl child that has been born in America in the last few years has been born with fewer rights than her mother and her grandmother, her great-grandmother, and that has been particularly for black girls. That hasn't happened since the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the passage of black codes. So that is also, again, as you're looking at the two wolves, you know, there's a lot to celebrate, and we should. There's also things to be concerned about. You know, I monitored hate groups and hate crimes for many years under C.T. Vivian and Ann Braden. So monitored the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi skinheads, and actually had organized communities. The things that we were researching actually in the 90s has been actually, we're at a point where oppression has been legislated. It's one thing to have these issues of racism and division. It's even more sinister when this is being codified. And so our work is cut out for us. But one of the things that we did a few years ago was to buy a slingshot for our daughter to show her, because she was concerned about, wait, it seems like so much is going backwards. And we can talk about the inevitable backlash for progression. That has always also happened. But when we bought her the slingshot to demonstrate the fact of, you know, when you put something in a slingshot and it appears when it's going backwards, you're pulling it back, you're pulling it back, you're pulling it back. While you're doing that, the sides are getting tighter and tighter. And when that's projected forward, not only is it going to go past where it started, it is going to go even farther with that force and power. And that's the way sometimes, because, you know, the road to democracy, freedom, justice, and equity, it's a winding road, but it is a road that will continue to go forward. Humanity has always gone forward, gone for expansion. When I myself despair, I think of Gandhi, and I think of Gandhi's words about when he despairs, and he thinks about the fact that tyranny seems at times to win. But when he really thinks about it, throughout history, no matter how much it looked like it was winning, it never has won. Ultimately, never. Well, that's not going to start changing now. So that is what gives me hope. When I think about our ancestors, when I think about the impossibility, everything that you were just stating, it seemed that would have seemed impossible to our ancestors. But yet, there it was. Freedom at one time seemed impossible to our ancestors, getting an education. But, our ancestors continued against tremendous odds to stand up and to push forward. We have been unwavering in our stand for democracy and humanity, and we will continue to do that, all of us. It's just simply our turn. It's our turn to continue that long march towards freedom, and we will do it just as we've always done.
What is the message you want all Americans, not just Black Americans, Americans to take away from this year's recognizing of Martin Luther King?
So it's a very simple message. United, we will stand and survive. Divided, we will fail. We will fall and fail. So it really, it is. You can be united and disagree. Human beings are not monolithic. So there's diversity. But you can't, if you're destructive and disruptive, as I said, it's not sustainable. And we have to look down the road a ways, not just right this moment, because we're in the moment right now, which is also a human quality. But we have to look and build beyond, and then we have to have a strategic plan, a strategic focus if we're going to bring about change. It's not just about, none of us are here ourselves, so it can't just be about me and my child or children. It has to be about us. How do we create a better us for our nation and the world? And the world is looking at us for leadership. I'm not saying that we are providing an appropriate model at this particular moment. When you see there's something dramatically wrong in a nation that is 300 plus million people and has so many homicides and suicides. There's killing. What is wrong? I mean, there are other nations in the world that have just a few homicides a year. How are they able to do that? These are Western nations. What is it that's wrong with it? And if we don't acknowledge there's a problem, we're obsessed with guns. There are other nations who have guns too, but they're not using them to kill themselves. We are programming and propagating and promoting something that is causing decay and destruction. What we bring to the table is, we talk about love, we talk about forgiveness, we talk about lifting each other up. And people have to hear and see themselves in that more and more. And where I have great hope is I think there are a lot of young people on the horizon. We don't know their names yet, but that is what they are. They are engaged. I mean, there were movements that came along, and my father used to say that every time we make a modicum of progress, there's always resistance. In 1963, March on Washington, there were 250,000 people here in Washington. And it was a march for jobs and freedom. Everybody felt good because you had different ethnic groups. You had different religious leaders from all, from the Jewish community, from the Christian community, from, even there were people who were agnostic and maybe even atheists. But they came because they felt a sense of freedom. My point is, less than 3 weeks after that march, you had the Birmingham 16th Street Baptist Church bombed. So every time there are strides, there's always pushback. You know, George Floyd created a shift momentarily in our nation for about a year. And then all of a sudden the pushback started coming. And so we have to expect that. But you have to stay on the battlefield to know that change is inevitable. And although, as I said, it may look like we're losing terribly right now. One day we'll look at this as a snapshot in history and say we became a better nation because we continued to stay and fight for that which is good, just, and right. But that climate has to be created. It doesn't happen on its own.
Absolutely. Well, maybe one of those young folks you were talking about is known by the name of Yolanda. But I want to thank both of you so much for coming and talking with me today, especially getting right off of a flight and coming over here to our little studio. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.